And like, oh, StreamYard.
Is it doing its thing?
Oh, it didn't do its thing. We had like the whole thing, and I guess we're gonna have to just do it again. You ready? Like,
I'm
we'll just do
in.
it. All right, cool. Worked
There we
once.
go.
We'll try it again. Friends,
Friends, Romans, countrymen.
I was gonna say friends and neighbors, if you've never tried to stream live while on the road, you might have yourself a real time of it. Because, man, it's a little wild, and I like it. It's that uncomfortable feeling that lets you know that it's working. So we are Essen Community College's open office hours. I'm one of your hosts, Prof. Ben, and I'm joined as well as often as I can be by fellow co-host Prof. Sean. Though I don't want to take that for granted, sir. I'm always glad you're here.
Thank you very much. Love doing this. This is kind of my bonus time.
It is kind of cool, right? It is kind of nice when we have our little thing going on, and we get to answer questions from folks out in the community trying to do their best to learn, like you listening or riding along at home. So this week we have our penultimate episode. We are covering kind of the end of the ServiceNow Fundamentals book. If you're kind of taking the free class online, that is one of the last chapters right before the capstone. Next week, we'll have an episode kind of talking about practicing and the capstone and trying to challenge yourself. This week, we're really going to try and focus on a couple things in our first segment, which is kind of back to first principles. The segment where we kind of talk about some of those little hidden elements, the little things that we wish that somebody had told us when we started, the things that we hoped, that have we've kind of like little nuggets and tips and tricks and things like that that have made us a little bit better along the way. And this week it's going to be related to kind of getting started with some of the development stuff, right? Because this is where some of us like look at that cliff and then we don't want to walk over the edge.
Yeah, this is definitely the part I always find is that tricky element in study too, right?
Mm-hmm.
About when is enough not too much, right? And when do you get to that point where you kind of dive down the rabbit hole and study too far in something, particularly when we're thinking about the CSA where we want breadth, right? We want to go all the way across from architecture to a little bit of scripting to database administration to all of the different components and thinking about things like configuration management, etc. We don't want to go too deep, but we want to go deep enough.
Absolutely. And this is actually going to be a nice tie into our segment on It Came from the Parking Lot this week, where I have a listener question related to trying to debug notifications from an application in the instance, and maybe an executive is getting way too many notifications and trying to figure out what to do with them. And the notifications aren't actionable, they're not viewable. And like, what do you do, right? So how do you figure out how to solve it? How do you figure out what to do in the meantime so that you don't really anger a stakeholder? And, kind of an action plan. So, but I think we're going to get right into kind of the big thing, and that's the kind of back to first principles, the sort of thing that we start the show off every week with, and we try to do a little bit of a mental level up by returning back to the thing that we should all hopefully better understand and we haven't just kind of taken for granted. And this week it's some of the data models related to things like business rules and UI actions, and trying to figure out when you're getting into that module in module 5 in the fundamentals class, what you should be paying attention to, like what's actually useful for you, especially if you're prepping for the exam, those of you guys who are making flashcards, and how to kind of get your ServiceNow developer. You kind of want the fitted hat, right? Like you don't want just to take somebody else's cap off the rack, right? You want the fitted suit, you want the fitted hat. You got to put your own mental model on, I think is what we're trying to say here. And Sean, you're like giggling. I like that.
I can't help it. I'm just thinking about that little mental tinfoil cap.
Well, I mean, that's the goal, right? Is to be fitted with your own tinfoil hat, like the one that you have. Well, the one that I have, right? Like it took a long time to get this tinfoil hat, and that tinfoil hat came with lots of lots of good things along the way. I don't really mean that. Not really good. Um, so let's kind of just jump into this first part, and that's the trying to better understand how to really think about some of the kind of basics when we get into module 5 here. And I'm going to have to do a little bit of juggling. For those of you guys at home who weren't reading along this week, I'm actually on the road. I'm not in my regular home studio, as you might tell. I've interestingly enough, I've got kind of a single bag setup, which I'm fairly proud of. My kind of backup stuff, and then I've got a little LED light that kind of fits in here. Though with the way that the sun is shining at the moment, we're actually not doing too bad in terms of lighting. Just trying not to wash myself out. Um, I almost thought I was trying to tune this, and I didn't realize right at go time the sun was coming down. So I'm like, how do I get better at that? In
So
the
now
meantime, though,
I was just going to say, now you've got the excuse for either eyebrow, right? Because you got a little glare factor going on. So it could be
right?
one side or the other. It's hard
I
to
know.
say.
I'm
I
like,
can't do
oh,
both.
how do I get my camera to just like adjust just a little bit, just to so that it I want to try and touch up some of my brightness issues. Yeah, please at me in the chat if you're like, bro, just use this filter in OBS, it'll fix it for you. I would love to know that, because this is one of those things I spend hours tuning in my own studio. So
Well,
um,
and speaking of chat, I just want to mention I threw this out there. We've got a couple more people coming on the live side, and in case you didn't see that in the chat or comments, because we're covering Module 5, the last piece of the fundamentals. If there's an area that you've got kind of questions as you wrap up that section about development, and you're thinking about UI, business rules, when, how, where development, then please do throw them in the
right,
comments or in the chat
right.
for the LinkedIn, so that we have them on the stream and we can kind of get to them. But I think we're going to take a look at that angle. And am I right? We're going to kind of dive down the layers, right? We'd
We're gonna
start
dive
at
down
the
some
top.
layers. Yep, and I'm gonna try something new here since I don't have a multi-monitor setup like I normally would. And we're going to try to just see if StreamYard is actually going to let me share this tab properly. So like, you guys let me know if I switch tabs around here, you guys can see stuff, right? Like, is it
I
still
see
there?
the
Is it
open
not there?
office hours tab.
Oh, sweet. So you see like a little whiteboard. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. So definitely not sponsored by Canva, but I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun because I get to kind of play around with this thing. All right.
Yeah. Canvas
So
at last.
I'm going to make a little dotted line here, and we're going to talk about something that you really touched on a couple weeks ago, and that was kind of this
The water
dividing
line.
line. Yeah. And interestingly enough, like you show it in, is that really 90 degrees? I think it's 90 degrees. Anyway, so you show it like above water, below water. Some of us, and this is why I love that we all kind of think differently here. Some of us think about this from a like above. Nope, 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 nope. No, let's not duplicate that. Let's make that actually bigger, since that's better. Some of us think about this as one side or the other instead of up or down. I actually,
Ah.
I had a thing like where I really didn't get it until I saw the diagram left to right, like playing tennis or something. So like client side, and we go here and I duplicate it and I go like boom,
Mm-hmm.
server side.
So clients like outside the house, servers inside,
Well, I mean,
or well, any
honestly,
side of any
like,
wall.
yeah, I was just like, it's one side of the line, other side of the line, because
Okay.
sometimes your client could be, and this is what's funny to me. Like, when we think about a model like this, it's really not about like where they are. Really, it's about just the communication.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're on one side of the tin can on the string, I'm on the other side of the tin can on the string, and we're just passing notes back and forth. And in fact, I actually like to think of it as a useful analogy. And I used to use this in classrooms to try and help this kind of make a little bit more sense. I would legit write a note, right? And I would say, today I'm the server, right? And I'm going to pass a note to you, and then you're the client, and then you read it, and then you respond to it, and you do something, and then you pass it back to me, right? This was like back in the day when people were just starting to understand kind of this idea of client and server, because it's not like, oh, I run the business and you're the client, right? There's just kind of a
Right.
consumption, right? They're both peers and they're just talking. It's just two people talking. Um, but the reason it matters when we say client is that we identify that there's, if I'm going to like duplicate this again here real quick, I think the thing that matters about the client stuff when we're talking about the module 5 stuff here is the client is just one of many kinds of ways to consume slash ask for info.
That's kind of that's a great point, because the client is just the fingers on the keyboards, but there are also a
Wait.
dozen
No,
integrations.
I was going to say it's not just fingers on keyboards. It's like anybody that's asking for stuff, right? Like it's
Right.
the person that wants to consume something, like consume the info. That was like a big level up for me, because most of the time when we think about the client, I think a lot of us just automatically assume what? We
The
just
hands and the
assume,
keys.
yeah, hands on
That person
keys.
typing.
Right. So usually it's like a person logged like on a computer, or person on a web browser, right? But if you kind of just remove that side of like that notion of the person, like it could just be anyone asking to ask for this data. So like sometimes, as some of you guys have seen in maybe some of the labs with like the flow designer, you can have a system user, and we would call that like I don't know, you could have that just be a script.
Right. So like the person typing could be the one, but then a script from some other source could be another, and
Yep.
another system, a different system maybe could be another.
Right. And we treat all of these the same, right? Because the thing that they
Right.
all have in common when it's client asking for stuff from the server is that, and this kind of is a throwback to an earlier portion that we talked about. I think this is what, episode 3, when we're kind of talking about some of the access control rules. Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, like none shall pass until you authenticate, which is kind of an interesting thing, right? Well, at least for privileged data. So like,
Hmm.
anyway, so like when we log in with usernames and passwords and such, right? So I'm just gonna remove that joke. But the thing that I really wanted to, I'm actually like digging the way that this interface is working. I'm trying not to make it too big or too small. So we got this client side and we got the server side of the shop, right? And I think the thing that we end up seeing, like especially when you look in the book here, and you're like, okay, there's all of these, and you go and take the self-paced learning. The book is a little different, but it looks a little different anyway. So if we just kind of zoom in here a little bit, we get really fussy about, some of the components here in quote unquote scripting and development. And there's some specific things that I think really help us to understand in terms of what's going on and where they're going on. And I'm actually going to start. Oh, and I'm thinking that I'm sharing here, but because I'm only sharing this one,
Yeah. When you said
tab.
expand, I wasn't sure what
Oh,
you were zooming
funny.
on. You're
All
still
right.
in Canva.
Nice. Okay, cool. So this is, I'm just going to give myself like one little, I didn't actually give myself I didn't script myself a puntometer this time. It's a trap. But I'll use that as kind of my indicator that Ben punted on that one for just a second. Because I do like to call out that, none of us are perfect on this, but all right, here's a cool thing. If I just like pop this in here and we scroll down for a minute, and I think I'll be able to actually export this whole like whiteboard later, which is why I'm trying it out. And by the way, this is like I don't know if you realize this, Sean, but I got the notification that these whiteboard things were available in this in this product this morning or yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's try it out. Let's try it out. Totally unproven. Have no idea if it's going to work out or not. Let's try it out and see if I can make use of it in the office hours today. And as a result, I will probably have a couple of these flubs, but that's fine. Um,
What
so,
better way to learn?
right, just messing it up. So, what I wanted to say though is that when we were kind of talking about sort of the things that you need to know for your CSA, and when we're kind of going through and doing what I like to call the um, oh, the like the appetizer sampler platter, right, of quote unquote development in ServiceNow. It's these items that are kind of highlighted in the top, right? So we think about these business rules, we think about these client scripts, and we think about these data UI/data policies, and then some of these actions. It's mostly because these are some of the easiest ones for us to mess with
Right.
at an introductory level, right?
So
And if we're
instead of serving up a canap, you're serving up a UI policy or a client script. But these are all the places or the trays on which you can kind of set your little treats, right?
yeah, all of them will feed you, I guess, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
So, and they all deal with data in one way or another, and that's kind of our bag when it comes to thinking about stuff coming in and out of the platform. So, now that I've got this kind of bigger, I'm going to make this a little bit wider. We're still trying to figure out how this looks. Like I said, I'll publish this to a PDF, and maybe we can figure this out after the fact. So I think the first thing that we need to understand are, in fact, actually, let me bring these back in. If I were to ask you of these items down here, we talk about UI like UI and then data policies. So UI policies versus data policies, UI actions, business rules, and client scripts. Is there any clue here where we can figure out which items potentially are going to be things that matter or happen client side versus server side? And I'm going
Well,
to
and I'd
kick that.
love to see if we have anyone on
I would love
the
that too.
comments that wants to throw in. What's your tip or trick for knowing your client side or server side? Anyone have anything? I
I
always feel
almost
like with this, we got to give it like a 7-second delay. What's your
right.
hint? When I always look at this, when I'm looking at the system, and this is actually what helped me understand architecturally what's going on better, is when I started looking at the system and going, oh, that's a client script. Oh, that's a UI policy. Oh, that's a business rule. And to me, for me personally, there's one rule of thumb that always narrows it down to client side, server side.
There's one that I like a lot too. And I feel like a little bit Blue's Cluesy right now. I'm like, or maybe Dora the Explorer. I'm like, there's a clue here. Do you see it? Um,
And it's like blinking right in the yeah before it gets highlighted. I can't believe that I know Dora the Explorer that well.
and you know what? Honestly, this is one that I feel like is definitely a good thing to think about. So
Yeah.
when we talk about client side, UI equals user interface, and if there's user, that implies client. So if it says UI, this is a good like little heuristic. All right, so that's
Yeah.
the harder one. But then if it says client script, that's probably also like a good clue. So client scripts.
Well, and to me, the other piece is just as much as figuring out whether something's client side in terms of what its name is the behavior that I see on the screen. And
Okay.
it's always it's again like a Dora the Explorer thing. I'm always looking for that button. And if it's happening without that button, then I got a good hint that it's probably on the client. Oh,
Okay.
we got Jace here. Welcome, sir. Great to have
Hey,
you, and
hey.
thank you.
Doing our kind of back to first principles here, kind of talking
Yeah,
about kind of trying to identify for folks who are trying to get their CSA certs. How do we know when we're looking through kind of some of these options here, like when do you apply it? What does it mean? What side of the fence is it on?
yeah,
So we were talking about all the different kind of common ways that we care about in ServiceNow. When we're looking at these, it does kind of give you a lot of clues to not just answer the question correctly on the exam, but also when you should care about it.
yeah,
So UI, probably a client thing. Client scripts, also a client thing. If it's on-screen behavior, probably a client thing. And then that's a useful heuristic, I think, right? Heuristic
yeah.
being like a decent rule of thumb is sort of like, and I love messing with heuristics, right? Because I find it really fascinating to find patterns. Um, so that leaves some of our other stuff, right? So we know that UI, if we go over here, we know that UI actions and then UI policies are client side. That leaves the server side stuff as business rules, which we'll talk about how the business rule execution thing works again, even though we did do a little bit of an architectural kind of Sean's talk on this on episode 3 is really good. And then we've got data policies. And I do think that that's really important to kind of point that out, that when we look at this in the both the course and in the guides, it says UI slash data policies. Those are two very different things. They're
Yeah.
two sides of the same coin. A UI policy is specifically for a client. A data policy applies server side and doesn't care about what client you are. They're like David Spade in old SNL. Like, I don't
Don't
know if you
care.
remember. Yeah.
Right, wasn't that
And
the
you
airline one?
are, yeah, don't
Yeah.
care. And you are, right. And I want to say like Phil Hartman comes in. He's like, my name is Charlton Heston and my house is aflame. Right. And he's like running from the hills and he's still
Right.
dressed probably like he's from Soylent Green. And David Spade's like, and you are. So like data policies don't care about the client. And that is like the oldest pop culture reference. I'm so sorry, guys, for all the millennial and Gen Z and everybody else out there. Like, please don't at me. So sorry. Um, so that leaves business rules and data policies that we can talk about kind of on the server side that really don't care at all about what's happening about the interface or the client itself. And here's an interesting thing to keep in mind. This is kind of like my pro tip when it comes to some of the client stuff. Um, and why we should care. Client stuff is useful for cleaning up incoming, and I'm going to just like make that incoming data before it hits the server.
Right. It's so funny as you're talking through this, Ben. I'm thinking it, it's the back end of the cafeteria. It's the mail room. It's
Right?
the all they see is the stuff that comes through the slot at them. And
Right?
you know how many great movies have we had about the, oh, it's the letter to Santa and we didn't realize until we saw that. But it's from their perspective, once it comes through the mail slot, that's server side. I just got
Right?
to take these 4,000 letters and open, move, direct, whatever I'm doing with them. Don't, and
Yep.
that really was what the database side is all about, right? It's processing the letters.
Right? Well, and I was going to say once you've kind of gotten the letters in the box, then we can do interesting stuff, but I think if you we have to remember at the end of the day, all that ServiceNow is a UI on top of a database. And if we don't
Yeah.
give it good data, if we don't give it actionable, reasonable data, and we honestly like, there's a lot of stuff we can do to clean up data once it gets onto the platform. But a lot of the reason all of these UI and client side things exist is to be like the squelch on that on the junk data before it gets there, right? Because
Right.
once it's on the server, then you got to do stuff with it, right? So if we can make it so that we design the mail slot so that it only fits mail sized packages, right? Like letter sized
Yeah.
packages, then you filter out a bunch of stuff, right? That's a little bit of interface design, right?
Yeah.
Like
And if
that is, yeah.
it's that exact, and if you could find a way to make the envelope so that people put the stamp on the right side and the return address on the, like, if you put little boxes
Mm-hmm.
or things on that, that's exactly what UI is. It's
Right.
making that letter so that it's like bulletproof for you to give the right address in the right places for them to pass it through the mail slot. And so that's
Yep.
really a great way to think about when you would use UI policies and when you would use
Right.
client scripts, is to facilitate making them frame the data really well before you send it on its journey and on its way.
So if I want to, and let's see if we can be extra cool here and try and share some examples of some of the UI stuff that we use. And this is also fun because I didn't realize StreamYard could do this, and we're just kind of doing this on the fly. Let's do, I think that's the right tab.
One of these days, I'm going to track how many different technologies you're experimenting with all at once, from, the not just a ServiceNow interface, but StreamYard and LinkedIn and Canva and all live
Yeah.
at the same time.
I'm just going to say that, like, one of the things that I've gotten really comfortable with, and maybe this is just a legacy of being like a band nerd or drama nerd or like somebody who just eventually stopped caring whether people thought I was cool or not. Um, you just like start doing stuff and you just try and figure it out. Or as my grandpa used to say, F around until you figure it out.
Right?
Like, you know? But it looks like I'm in the right tab. It looks like I am sharing this. Cool. Nice. And if I, let's try and zoom this in here. So, um, if we're looking at, like, let's just say that we go to, we're going to go to the task form here. And this is a callback, y'all. If this is your first time with us, the form is kind of like a way that I force myself to remember all of the tables. So there's several really useful shortcuts that, well, I don't want to call this pro types, but like folks use all the time. So there's dot form, dot list, dot config, and dot filter. And super useful just from a perspective of like, oh yeah, okay, we know that some people already know this, but also like it's a really good way to force yourself to remember tables.
Yeah.
Because you have to know the table name in order to use that shortcut. So that's like that is the you must be this tall to ride this ride requirement, is remembering the tables. All right, so I'm here in the task table, which if we remember back to people do stuff to things, is one of the three legs of our sort of ServiceNow data model. And I'm going to point out to you guys all of the places that the first of our options, the first of the things that we care about in the CSA stuff, the UI stuff, like, so the UI actions. And this is going to this might shock and amaze you. But this submit button, that's a UI action. This save button, that's a UI action. All of these like little icons up here, they're all UI actions. If I go to save this record, any of these related links, guess what? They're UI actions and you can edit them, which is amazing. I feel like the first time I realized that I could just go in and do the following. Like if I go in and configure, you guessed it, UI actions, I could make my own button. This is kind of wild. Like when you do this, I'm totally, by the way, don't ever do this on the task table. Do as I say and not as I do. But I'm just, obviously ServiceNow best practice, wrong answers only. Like don't add a button to the task table, guys. I'm just doing it for this example because we all know task. But if I
But
wanted to make a, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm with you 100%. When you realize that even the buttons are just records in a table, it is revolutionary. You used to jokingly call it McLean's Law, and I would have to call it Borson's Law because I got it from Mr. Steve Borson, who just
Ooh,
reminded me that area. But just that idea that the buttons, even the buttons and the links, you just go to the table where they live, and then you can make your own. It's just
right.
it. Then it kind of goes, oh, I get how this works now.
So if I want this to only appear on a form, this like that was easy. And honestly, like if we had a little bit of time, I can show you, like I do in the scripting class, how to use you can actually do an attachment of the that was easy.
That would be great. Yeah, we could build that and actually put in the soundbite file for it
Yep,
too.
because it'll play when you push the button. Like, don't you worry, friends. Definitely do it. So we do this, and let's just like leave everything else alone. Also, like, check this out: workspace button, form button. We can totally just add any of this. So I haven't done anything with this yet, but if I save it, actually, if I submit it, it'll now show up as a button, and then we can tell it what to do, which is kind of cool. So if I just go back to the task form, like that's a UI action, right? This fact that I've like added a related link, I've added a button. This button doesn't do anything yet. Some of the other stuff we're going to talk about is actually what we need to figure out to make these buttons work. But like at the end of the day, that's what these do. UI actions are all just things that we can add to the whole platform, or to just specific forms, or to specific people. You probably saw that I could even go in. If I go back to my UI action now, you saw that I could just make it visible to only certain roles. So it's kind of like just that whole process here. So I could make it on the list, I could make it on the form, I can make it anywhere I want. So I'm going to deactivate this for now because I don't really want to have that showing up all the time on every thing that is extended from task. But let's say, actually, you know what is it they say? Damn the cannons. Let's just go and make it active again. If I wanted to hide, we'll use this as my, actually, this is a nice like little teaching moment here. If we want to use this as our next example, and can I switch StreamYard? Will you let me switch which? Oh, nope. I'm like,
Can't switch
StreamYard.
views from one
I
to
was
the
like,
other.
can you just let me switch to a tab easily? All right, I'm going to put in a suggestion, guys. All right, so we're going to go to a different Chrome tab because I want to go back to my whiteboard here. So we talked about the UI action, right? Being like the buttons, the commands that you want to be able to let your folks use. The next thing I can say is like the policies. When do those actions show up, and when do some of the form things show up? Because I just put that new easy button on our friend, the task table, which is a horrible idea. Don't mess with the task table, guys. Just don't do it. Think about 4 or 5 or 6 times and then check community before you add a field or something to the task table. Just going to put that out there. And let's see if I share. Will it let me? Okay, no, I have to share again to a different Chrome tab. Cool, 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 cool. Tight, tight, tight. No doubt, no doubt, no doubt. All right. So like I've got this that was easy button. What if I told you that we could make it show up only under certain conditions? Right? So let's say we go to our friend, the incident table for a minute, which because now we've made this that was easy button on the task table, guess what, friends? That was easy to put on the incident table and everything else that extends off of task. Just for a sec. But what if we only wanted to show up under certain circumstances? Well, that's where the UI policies and the UI policy actions come into play, right? The UI policies allow us to mess with both like what things are visible, what things are required, and when certain things show up or not. So if we want to create a UI policy, we can set some conditions around when they show up, when it shows up. And if, for instance, one of my favorites, we can do, and this is going to come back to the business rules here stuff in a second. This is the sort of conditional statement. This is the if part, right? Because we talk about this a lot when we talk about all of the automations in the platform. It's always a something that kicks off this action. So some people might say trigger, but it is the thing that lets the system know, because there's like, it is watching you. And if you tell it to watch out for this action, this when to apply, it'll do it, which is kind of neat. So if you say like, if caller, and actually, oof, all right, I forgot that the can't dot walk in this condition builder here. So I'm just going to add the little thing here real quick. Please pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This is going to be a thing like that we have talked about many times. Condition, we did this a couple.
We did it several versions,
Yeah.
several sessions ago, but this feels like these are the kind of things we will cover in more depth after August, right? When we start
Yep.
moving to like a more regular cadence and going into deeper dives, and maybe
Yep.
we'll have one that's basic concepts and another that's deeper dives and way deep stuff the whole way through.
So what I wanted to do was basically say, okay, when the caller field and an attribute a call about the caller, not caller is a person, but an attribute about the person, which the only way we can find out the attribute about the person is to do that thing we call dot walking, right? So we go over to that actual table using this little guy over here, and we look at the caller attributes or the caller fields, and we say if the caller is a VIP. So this one is going to apply. See if this works. So I'm going to save this here real quick. So now we've set, when does this UI policy apply? And what's cool is anytime this condition is met, the following things can potentially happen, which is pretty crazy. Like this is like a sort of dramatic moment, right? Because then this is where we get into the UI policy actions. This is, again, all client stuff designed to make it so that your end users don't, well, and end users includes you and I, friends, absolutely, like, so that we don't mess it up. So we'll say immediately upon the actions, we'll just say like, oh, do we want certain fields to be changed? Sure. Do we want them to be mandatory? Do we want them to be visible, invisible? Like, what do we want to do with them? Right. So like there's all these cool things that we can do with these to say, all right, let's say that if VIP, then we want to go ahead and trigger, let's say, let's do something like, well, short descriptions are already mandatory, but let's just say that we could do, oh, you can already see that I've done some other demos in here. Is it raining?
Just a bit.
Yeah, well, shout out to Alex Darby and one of my favorite all-time MVP field ads about a story that he told and that I relate to students to this day. Yeah, so let's say that, let's make something crazy here. Let's make just description task notes or something like escalation. Anyway, so we can basically go in and try to change some of the data values, right, in terms of what we want to be either mandatory, whether we want it visible or not, or whether we want things to be left alone in terms of read only. So for instance, there's another little trigger that happens when somebody's a VIP that can immediately change the priority of that incident to top priority. So we could say, oh, well, in that case, if they're VIP, we can also say that the priority like is going to, let's say even anything really could be mandatory or read only in here, and say that, okay, we're definitely going to mess around with some of the rule sets here in terms of changing what we either make people fill out or what is mandatory or not. So, for instance, if they were, let's actually do the priority again. Let me do that real quick. Let's say if they're VIP, we could override priority. I'm not saying this is a good idea, but you could. Let's say that when they're VIP, that we make all of the other mandatory fields not mandatory, or maybe we make other things change. That's actually going to get us into our last UI section, which is going to be some client script stuff, right? So we've talked about the data that could be incoming using some of the client side UI things. The last thing, if I actually want to change values, we can use the last of those little options. So we go to incident.
Well, and so while you're moving to that real quick, I just want to recap because we've got some new people jumping on. We're
Oh,
getting
cool.
to what we're really kind of covering, and we had some cool side conversations with Jace. But really, what we got to in talking about Module 5 and the development side is understanding the tools and how they're broken out. So when we talk about client side versus server side, Ben pointed out a really good thing to keep in mind. The hint to the client is often referred to as UI or user
Mm-hmm.
interface. As soon as you see that U, then you know that it's user facing and it's the user interface. Now, client scripting, of course, would be the one that doesn't start with the U, but kind of gives us the hint that it's client side. But all of that is the formatting of the information before it comes over to the server. So then we talked about UI actions, which really are kind of the bridge between the client and the server, right? Those are the buttons, the links,
Yep.
the references that we click on that push us over to the server. Then we talked about UI policy, which is just what we were looking at. And that idea that we can make those changes almost instantaneous. Fields disappear, reappear, turn mandatory, read only, just at the click of some other field or some other behavior. So now we're going, what if that's not enough in terms of formatting before I go to the server? In that case, we're talking client script. Now, I
Right.
would mention we also had some side conversation, yeah, about Ben had mentioned dot walking. So
Mm.
Jace had asked, just to reference, dot walking is the point of going from a referenced field. So the best example would be in the incident when you say, who's this assigned to? Well, we know I'm on the incident form, but assigned to is actually referring to the user table. That's a reference. When you move from a referenced field to its referenced table, in other words, the user table, that's a dot walk. If you were to proceed from that reference to that user's location, that would be another dot walk. And what Jace was asking is, how many dots can I walk? How far down can I go?
Ooh, this is cool. And it's actually one of those things where theory and practice.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I don't want to get us too dog legged
Yeah.
on that because we're still talking client side, but I just wanted to kind of recap for people coming in going, because and I think that's a thing is people join this. If you come in a few minutes, there's some pieces where you're like, where are they? Well, right
Oh,
now we're
yeah.
just talking client side. And we've talked about all the manipulation we can do on the client side, except for client scripts. So then we're
Okay.
getting into
Thanks
that
for
client script.
thanks. I almost fell for it. I almost was gonna do it. I was about to explain some database stuff in MariaDB. Apologies, y'all.
I was like, let's because
Yep. Like, just
clients
stay
cool.
focused, Ben. Stay focused. Stay focused. All right. So let's get back to our last one here. It's some of the client side stuff. These are all of the, and this is another interesting thing that I definitely want to point out that we don't point out necessarily in the fundamentals guide. Although I still feel like there might be some questions that pop up, but um, there are the things that, if you think about, like, what are all the interactions that I have with this client browser right now, right? Think about the different action states that we can record or that are significant. And you're watching it happen as I mouse over things, right? Because those are things that we regularly do, right? I mouse over the thing. And so
Right,
the
we can
thing has
move to
to,
fields.
right?
We can
So there's,
change data in fields.
right? I can start typing in, I can change some of those things. I can click in, right? because those are interactions that the system wants to be able to know about. I can mouse over. So there's on click, there's on focus, right? So there's like some of these little actions here that we can do. And if we actually go in here and configure our client scripts, these are some of the kind of common things that we can do. On change, right? So there's different interaction types that we would have. In fact, let me go back to that list there. And I'm going to group by here. On change, on load, on submit. In our current, I don't seem to recall in current like classic view that we can do on click. We can in portal and on workspace, but hold on. Type cell edit, change, load, submit. Yeah, I didn't think so. All right. So, but in this particular field, the incident and on task field, we've got what sort of things change when this form loads up based on whatever criteria, right? So things like automatically updating a person's location when the form loads. Actually, let's show matching and show like what things are true that automatically happen baseline, right? So things like hiding related lists in certain places or creating child incident upon specific conditions. So some of these little things you'll note are automatically true, like in my version here, but I'm actually going to remove here's some active false. So if we look at these, some of them are going to be just examples. Things like if we filter these out, and this is actually the show matching here. Some of these are little samples, right? To kind of teach you guys how to mess around with some of these options, to kind of give you a little bit of like hello world, right? That kind of ubiquitous. Here's my very first example of trying to play with something. So if you look at priority one less than or greater than one, or warn on trying to submit a priority one incident, you'll see that this is of type on submit, right? So this is when this would occur, right? And that actually matters for the client. Some of them are, like we said, when the client loads the form or loads the list. Some of them are when they actually finish changing something or when they go to edit at all. So if I were to go in and look at, all right, we're going to go ahead and try and submit this. And by the way, guys, you don't need to, if we're scared of scripting, don't be just yet. There's a lot of cool copy and paste type stuff that you can start to ramp yourself up on these. But this just says, all right, well, it's going to do a little pop-up window and say, are you sure? Before the client actually sends out. So this is going to ask us, are you sure? Let's update this. And this is a good example of like a decent way to think about, are you sure you want to do that, buddy? Because remember, the UI client stuff is all about getting the good data in before it hits the server. So if I do Fred Luddy, all incidents, we just say that he's always the problem.
We just give it to the man, right?
Well, he's always the one calling in about something like police misspelled helicopters. And like we go to try and make this because we activated that little client script, right? That says like, all right, we'll make it high, right? And this is going to, wait a minute. I messed around with this earlier. All right, we're going to let's just hi. This should not be planning. I've messed with the demo earlier, I think is what happened. But if I went to submit this, if I do impact urgency high, right? Uh-oh. That's funny. Okay, because I did a gag earlier and I totally messed up. Might also be one of those areas where when we debug this thing, right, like this should have gone high, high. Oh. Yeah, let's go back and fix that real quick. I know exactly where I did this. I was messing around with this. This is a fun way to do a little bit of troubleshooting. We're going to turn off the thing where I was messing with the priority field, guys. And let's not mess around with that right now. So let's go back to our friend Fred Luddy. All right. Hi. Oh my God. Fun times, y'all. I broke it. That's cool.
Well, while you're looking at that, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to grab while you take a peek. A couple of different things that we've been getting. And first, I want to thank
This
everybody
is
who's
this is pretty
coming in and
fun.
getting our chat active again. I love that. As you bring
Oh, good
questions and it
lord.
really helps. Just a few things, and these are things that I had said as we move from the high level, which is what we're doing now, right? We're wrapping up module 5 and talking
Yep.
about developer side stuff. And ultimately on developer side stuff, we talked UI policies, client scripting, and UI actions. All things that the U hints at user and the client hints at client side, which we're doing to format the data before it gets to server side. That said, we started getting some deeper questions about the dot walking side of things, but then
I want to get back to
also,
that too.
yeah, and that's what I was saying. We have that as a deeper question to get it to kind of on the back half of this session. But then the other couple pieces that were kind of floating through that we wanted to get to and maybe look at was some comments on a glide record from the client side, which again I think
Ooh.
is a whole like that. Again, I go that fits on the deeper side, right? And when. But then Alyssa and Phil also had a couple questions. Alyssa had brought up the idea of cheat sheets. Actually, Jace
Oh.
did an awesome job. He put out a resource on GitHub for that, which is mint. We're building up a few, and I had mentioned the syntax editor. But Philip was talking also about the idea of just on the client side that you were submitting, if I do an on submit and it fails, then the submission doesn't occur. To which the answer is true, but you can also create some other scripted actions. So on submit, then the
it,
submit doesn't occur, but you could also say, and post this message, and show this other field, and pre populate so that the user knows more about what they do or why it wouldn't submit.
so I think
I
I'm
hope
going
that
to
makes
get
sense.
back, right? So we'll go back to some of those client side things here we were talking about. So, cleaning up little bits of pieces of data. Yeah. So that's because we're making these notes so that everybody can have them after the fact, right? Interaction. Is this showing, by the way?
Which one?
Should be the Canva, the
Yes,
whiteboard. Okay,
Canvas
cool.
showing.
All right. What is it? It allows us to, like we've been saying, clean up, or you know what? Since Phil Swan's here, we're going to say tidy up, like the Brits do, which I love.
Yeah, and Philip, if you're here, then that means you are in the wee hours of the morning.
Well, so, and I like that we've kind of got all this stuff happening client side, and then we're now kind of going to say that once we've gotten into all the interactions and the types, and in fact, why don't we just also one more time do a little some of the ways that we can interact with a client script form. right? So it's like on load. Make that a little bit smaller. You got a four-legged intern here trying to help out.
Perfect.
Good, good. All right, so on load, and then we've got, right? We've got telling a user they can't do something like that. Most famous example is, well, I think most of us have experienced it, right? If we've ever done any of the fundamental stuff, when we try to rename, so we'll say, e.g., naming a table, right? There's that client script that automatically puts in the u underscore. So if we share, like, stop for just a second, like, I feel like that one's so, it's such an easy one when we look at it. Like, it's like people go like, oh, that's how that happens,
Yep. I find the same thing with the client script on the client scripts, right? When you
right?
change the type, it automatically pops in a script. That's and it's kind of mind-boggling. You go, wait, there's a client script on the client scripts, and I just feel like my brain kind of goes like that. But the u underscore task is perfect, or the u underscore table name is. It's a
Yep.
perfect example of I insert some. I just do this little thing before the user hits go.
Because they want to do something, right? So if I go like
Yeah,
ends cool app, right, and we do the little change here, and then I'm like, no, right? I don't want it to have a U. I think U's are not cool. And it's like, nope.
right.
You're like, nope, right? So we can actually go and see that by just going client scripts. And this is actually this is one of the ways that I first started to um, learn how to, and we'll do on change. Actually, let's filter out on load and on submit, right? So all these on changes, table name change, label change. This is that one where it's like, oh, no, you must put a U in there, right? There's like a little like, gotcha. It goes and does all of this stuff in the background and automatically appends that cool new name to it, that little U in there. It's pretty sweet.
Philip is pointing out that this doesn't happen on import set tables, but again, this is
That's
one of those
true.
things where you could actually probably track it down to where and why it's not running, and I'd assume either the client script
Boop.
isn't there or the import table isn't there. But again, I keep wanting to bring this back for folks who are still at the taking the ServiceNow Fundamentals
Yep.
class and seeing that the moral of what's going on, the point of this is very simply that you can create the kind of functionality that, like we were talking about with addressing a letter before it goes in the mail. We want
Yep.
to put the stamp on one side, the address on the other. Really, what client scripts and UI policies and all of the UI slash client side things are doing is trying to format that letter before it goes in the mail slot. Once it's in the mail slot, then we're on the server side of the house. So Ben's just shown some great examples of that kind of formatting. I go to type a table name. Oop, let's put a U on front of that just because it should. So that's exactly what client scripts and UI policies are meant to do, to help the user in the interface format before it gets to the end where the data is doing its thing. So now I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to step away for just a moment.
I feel like the on submit client scripts are a little bit, they're a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, we might say just like, it's kind of like the church lady. Like, are you sure you want to do that right now? Because that's kind of what it's really trying to do. It's just trying to ask you to check yourself before you wreck yourself. Um, the on change or the on sell edit, these are both kind of, are you sure? Like, I can't trust you. I'm going to slap your hand before, we let you do that. Now that we've talked about all the ways that we can kind of fix all of the stuff over here on the client side, it's cool to just kind of give a real quick shout out to our friends uh, over on the server side, because when we get into the care and feeding stuff, this is some of the stuff that really is going to be, some of the things that we worry about the most. Because I think what a lot of us, well, actually, let me preface this a bit. Um, those of us who've worked in some of these spaces before and done scripting, and we're used to just interacting with data in a way that, like, oh, if it weren't for those pesky users, I would have gotten away with it, right? Um, we feel like, oh, well, users can do stuff however we want, and we can do these really cool scripted actions. And then we get kind of frustrated a little bit when some of the business, like when these things don't work, which is why some of the client stuff is really so crucial. But let's talk about some of the things that happen with business rules, which business rules really are table-based triggers, or what in some parlance you might have known as field watchers, depending on where you came from in the space, right? So, like, I like to think of business rules as the thing you tell your buddy, like when you're brewing a beer. In fact, I think this is like my favorite analogy. Um, when you're doing a brew and you're like, you're in the kitchen and you have a little kid in the kitchen, um, just watch this thermometer and then tell me when it hits X temp, right? Usually that's all I can trust somebody in the kitchen to do. It doesn't understand the recipe or what it is I'm trying to do. All I'm like trying to get them to do is just like, when it hits this place, let me know. Either like let me know with a notification, or if you trust them a lot, you can replace the tell me when, right? Because it's what this tell me when is do this action when it hits X temp. Right? That's the kind of kitchen example or the brewing example. Or again, if we're going to stay there, like with the brewing or the kitchen example, we'll say when it gets to be this time, you know, do the following action. So there's a couple of these things that we do. Like this is, by the way, is what we call a scheduled job, which is not really any different. It's not written any different than a business rule is. It's just put in a different place. And if we're going to talk about this even further, when I say the magic word, do the following. That's what we call, I'll put a little note here. That's what we call a script include. And what's cool is that the business rules, they can basically call upon or trigger or enact a lot of these other functions. So the business rule at its baseline, its core, is watch this field or watch this table, and when the following happens, tell me about it or do this action. So we've got our first example there. So there are some cool things that we want to think about when we think about business rules. And the first is, actually, let me undo that. As we're playing around with new tech, let's try this and let's copy this because that seems to be easiest. Just like with the client script stuff, there's a rhythm. Oh man. And Sean, I know you were going to step out for a second, but there's a rhythm here. I'm like, there's a pattern. And that's when we get into kind of this cool idea of this right here, right? Like our kind of like little dividing line between client side and server side. So we've talked about the things that happen client side. We've talked about the things that are happening server side. But if we were to go now to, we'll do another, actually, let me copy, since we're messing with this. Let's copy this guy and move it down here on my whiteboard. If we were to say that like this is the dividing line between when something happens, like this is what we sometimes call like the transaction line. I'm just going to have to make this bigger. And with only one laptop screen on the road here, I'm like, maybe we'll figure out how I can monitor chat in a better way. This is, what are we going to call it? We'll call this, I'm going to go check chat real quick and see if I can see it. All right, cool. Just was checking. It's one of those things where sometimes we have to look in. Don't want to leave anybody out. So, all right. So as we're going here, thanks for that. Appreciate it. So we've got the transaction line, right? Like that's where it's more like to say the magic happens. So if we were to kind of copy this here and say, let's have a conversation, right? I am the client and I want something. What ends up happening is the client basically makes a request to the server, right? And I'm going to go a little bit kind of really pedantic about this, but we're going to kind of be back and forth about it. So this transaction line is really important because this all happens every time the client goes to make a request to perform certain actions. So like if they want something, basically what happens when we have the server response is, and we'll say that when the client wants something specifically, I want to look up some info. There is this notion of, I'm going to copy this over here, rules that happen between the server side, and this is kind of the flow of this. There's the before rule, right? Before rules, right? And we'll say the after rules. So before the client is able to ask for the thing, you can have a business rule say, like before even something happens. So we'll say like, I want to look something up. So we can say that there is this look something up. We actually call this a query. So there's the before kind of query. And then there's like, so before the query even gets to the server, right? We have a before rule that says before they can do anything with it, right? We do something to that data. Then there's the after. And then there's the before, what we call display. On the return trip, right? So before they're allowed to even look at anything, there's some rules that go, hey, do you have the right to even ask that question? Right? Like, what kind of user are you? those happen before even the server decides to even consider the query. So we've got the before query, we've got the after the query, we've got the before display, and then let's say that the client wants to do something else besides look up some data, right? We also could have, they want to, and I want to put some data in your system. So again, there are all of the rules that happen before they're allowed to actually insert, right? So before they're even allowed to put the data into the system, there's the before insert and the before update, right? And you can actually go and see this by going and let me switch over to this other tab here for a minute. And I knew we were going to go a little bit long on this. I forget sometimes how much stuff there is in this little section. Let me get to my incident here. If you go to configure your business rules, this is where we kind of get into all of the kind of when actions, right? So this is, when do these things occur? Is it, and this is, you'll see that it's when to run, right? So it's before, after, display. Oh, and there's a special category we call asynchronous, which I'll get to here in a second. But basically, the before, after, and display all happen as we're kind of going back and forth, like ping-ponging between the two different, between the client and the server. Now, the cool thing about the asynchronous ones is that they're like kind of putting in an order, and you're like, whenever you get around to it, right? And the server's always trying to crank through it, but it's not going to make you wait when it's asynchronous, right? This is a really efficient way to, and it's more development stuff later, but it's a really efficient way to kind of get a little bit of extra juice and say like, okay, we want the client experience to be a little bit better. Let's not fuss with making them wait. So let me refresh this screen here and check the chat as we're kind of going along here. Cool, 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 cool. All right. So let me go back to my little whiteboard here that I'm going to try and publish and share out when we finish as we do this live. This is what we call a chalk talk in the biz, by the way, if you're into teaching. Kind of old school. So we've got the before, we've got the display, right? And we've got the thing that happens during a query. And I'll put this over here, right? We've got the thing that happens during insert. We've got the thing that happens during all of the moments when we ask the system to do something. And then we've got, let me move this down here real quick. We've got this notion of asynchronous. Oh, sound like I heard Mr. Sean come back.
Yes, sir. I was just trying to catch up on bits and pieces.
Cool, cool, cool. Ooh, like to think about how I might use the timing with an example. Well, that's a good one, right? So if I want to look something, well, Sean, since you're back, do you want to, I know you've got a good example of like the kind of classic, because we talked about this a little bit in episode 3, right?
Yeah, I had mentioned this. Actually, I think I put in the chat. If we're talking about which one wins or which one happens, is that where we're at?
No, just kind of like the flow of it, right? So if I want to look up some info, right, there's the before query, then there's the after, right? There's the before
Right.
display, and then there's the, right?
Yeah, I like, and it looks like Jace is writing down, you modify data submitted regardless of how you get it. Yeah, to me, Well, one thing that I think of, and this starts to get to that whole table thing, but
Yep.
I like before things if I'm going to, I got to think about how I say this. If I'm writing
Mm,
to one table. So if I'm in a table, then before I update the table. So a great example is my own name. My name is what you'd call camel case. Capital M,
right.
lowercase c, capital C, so it goes like this. But in some systems, they want everything to be uppercase. So if
Yep.
I do a before rule before I write to the database, then I'm not writing to the database twice. I do a to upper function, which turns everything into uppercase and then writes to the database. So when you're writing to a table and you're only writing to one table, before rules are great because it processes the data rather than writing it to the database and then writing it to the database in the new way. But
Right.
I would use after rules in case I was writing to multiple databases. So I'm going to save this information not just in the incident, but in the
You're going to
related
trigger,
problem.
right. You're going to trigger
Yeah.
other actions after the fact. Right. Which
And
nowadays
those
we
to
kind of
me are,
use Flow Designer for folks, I think, in a lot of cases, for folks that are not as comfortable with the scripting stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And I love, and I'm with you with Ben's point to async. The, my example on async that I always think about is, have you ever seen the Q step, two step, the thing you do at airports, which these days we don't do as much of, but when everybody like runs to get to the front of the line, even though we still have to call zone one first, and then zone two, and then
Right.
zone three. If it's anything that's going to run on any kind of a scheduler at all, or if the user needs to type some more data while this thing is happening, I'd just as soon use async so that we know the system can catch up. Because it doesn't mean asynchronous like it'll do it tomorrow. It means that the
Right.
user can continue to write on the form while this is
We're not going to
happening.
hold you up. Well, right. We're not going to hold you up. It's asynchronous business rules are the little clicker, the little buzzer, the thing that you get at the restaurant when it's busy, and the hostess tells you, or the host tells you that we'll have a table for you here in a minute. Right. Like you
Yeah.
can continue on with your way, and we're going to give you this thing, and when it's ready, we'll tell you. Right. Like rather than making you stand at the station until a table like is available, if that makes sense. I think that's kind of like the way that I like to think about that.
Yeah.
um so this actually gets us into I didn't I'm running out short on time now as I get close to the end. I wanted to talk about data policies, but actually I think we kind of touched on a little bit, but data policies just being the sort of server side version of the UI policy, where we're going to really strictly enforce like what data can and cannot go into the table. So this is your mandatory type of your mandatory and your read only type fields and things like that. So um, this gets me to an interesting, speaking of field watching and event processing and business rules, are kind of, it came from the parking lot question this week,
Nice.
which is all about debugging notifications, and specifically in this case, trying to find ways to debug notifications that are bugging like really high profile. Well, we were talking about VIPs earlier, but like let's say you've got an aggravated CISO who suddenly is getting all of these vulnerability notifications or approvals that haven't been approved, and suddenly like 700 show up in their inbox and they don't want them. Right? What do we do? How do we debug that?
We were just
So,
talking about a gentleman who has 30,000 emails, I think.
oh, good, yeah. Like it's shout out to Mr. Glenn Pinto, who every time he shares his screen, I get a little bit queasy, and I feel like maybe he holds it as a point of pride. What up, Glenn? And I think he laughs every time I tell him I get queasy when I see 30,000 unread emails in his Outlook little badge notification at the bottom of my screen. I don't know about you guys, but that stuff makes me really twitchy. So,
Yeah.
um, so in this case, though, I wanted to kind of point out like some common things that we can do to both troubleshoot, debug, little things that I think are really helpful to know and how they happen. So I'm going to quickly go back to my friend over here. Here we go, my other instance over here. And regardless of whatever you've got installed in your environment, um, it is useful to know a couple of things when it comes to notifications. Notifications, guess what, are just working on a field watcher, right? The field in question that they're watching is oftentimes either the table or an event. And guess what? The event is also a table. So if you go to this event, that's a table, my friends. And there are all of these like little things that show up. And when they happen, if you look at our friend notifications of any kind, really, they are looking for the same kind of if this, then that little trigger, right? It is a field watcher, it is a table watcher. So you say, what table do you care about, right? So in this case, this was having to do with some, it's an interesting one. It was kind of a custom business rule that was created and what we call an event register. It was looking for basically anytime it's actually a two-parter, which is funny. But the way that you go to look at it is you go and look at the outbound messages, right? And this is going to give you, right, and I don't have any created today in this demo environment, but you want to go look at what has been sent out by the system today so that you can figure out, well, one, what triggered this particular event. And it's going to tell you a couple things, or this particular notification. It's going to tell you if it was triggered by like something in sys event, or whether it was triggered by a particular notification that you created in the notifications table. In this case, it was being triggered by something in the event, which was a little business rule that clicked, a scheduled job actually, that ran every day and checked the staleness of approvals. And every time any approval was over a certain amount of time, it would basically spam all of those approvers that were on that particular approval. Like, hey, nobody's touched this thing. You going to do something about it? Which was a little scary. And in that case, right, so we look at, if I go and look at any particular notification, you can kind of see where it came from, what it looked like, how it was triggered. And what we actually want to be able to see here when we go into our notifications themselves in terms of trying to debug them or figure out how to fix them is figuring out, like, are they being sent out by an event? Are they being sent out by something just sitting here in our little conditions? Are they being sent out by Flow Designer, and so on? I also wanted to kind of point out that when you kind of can see where it's coming from, how it's coming into the system, right? So you can actually see that we have kind of a basic notification. Somebody's been assigned to this task. You've got your kind of trigger conditions and when it will run, just like in Flow Designer, and some condition builder stuff here, right? Only the people that are relevant. Let's say you go to make a change to this and you're in like a dev or a test environment before you're trying, like as you're trying to troubleshoot this stuff and figure out how to fix it. One of the things you might want to do, and this is kind of a neat little thing here, is if you go out to Inbox in your demo environment or your test or dev environment, you can actually create a sample notification or like an inbound email or an outbound email or anything like to force this notification to go out. You can kind of force it to see if it actually is going to trigger the action you're looking for. The other thing that I like to do here when we're talking about triggers, events, notifications, and we're trying to kind of follow the trail, as it were, you're doing a little investigation, especially when it comes to notifications. A lot of people have sort of notification preferences set up. And if they've got any specific ones in here, you can also go and debug these by looking at a system, the user's preferences, right? So you can, if you're afraid of maybe that user in a dev or testing environment, like if it's not something you're allowed to do, you can kind of go in and find all of these preferences and changes by going into sys user preference and searching for that user's preferences, right? So we can go and find all of mine as the sysadmin or as Ben Forrest, right? And find specific little changes that I've made for this. And you can kind of continue to filter these down by type if you need to, specifically for notification or for view or display or filter. Also handy to note that you can modify these for folks if it's just an emergency, like I am not a power user, I just want my dashboard to be the one that displays up on my screen when I log in. And I'm sure we've all been there as folks who have done tech support for folks in our families over the years. This is one of those ways you can kind of come in and just easily go in and modify some of those values in an instance and figure out, just like, okay, I fixed your view, Mr. or Mrs. VIP, I will get it back. So Sean, I see some of the backtracking there that you've been talking about. I appreciate
I'm
it.
just trying to sum up. So you put, when you look at the email notifications, you start for the outbox, and then you track that
Yes,
back and it's kind of funny because outbox is the one place, but outbox tracks back to two places, either the notification definition, which can
it
directly send
does.
emails, or event-driven notification. So if you're tracking from the outbox, then you go back to those two places, the notification definition or the driving events. Unfortunately, if it's events, that tracks back to anywhere that Ben was just showing that could script, because anywhere that you
Right.
could script can put something into the event queue, as can tools like Flow Designer or Workflow. So really, if you start from the I guess it's from the front and work your way back to the underlying source, you can track things. But I love this last trick that you're bringing up as well, which is the idea that you can actually check other users' is system preferences by going to the right table, the system preferences table, to see if they're looped in there.
It's kind of one
So
of those like little easy, it feels a little bit like a cheat when somebody is like, dude, I have some VP somewhere and they just want the dashboard to show up on their screen. And you're like, cool, I can just like force that to happen, right? You can go in fact, I'll just show you the kind of last way to do that if we want. Um,
yeah.
this feels a little evil. So use this only for good, friends. Um, this is one of those ones where, let's say I make any change to anything, right? I'm going to just favorite this for a minute. So let's say that I make a,
Let me let me backtrack and make sure, because I'm thinking sys preferences, but I forget the name of the table. Is it sys user preferences or sys preferences?
it's sys user preference,
That's right.
singular, not
Thank
plural. Yeah,
you.
it throws me every time.
Yeah, I
But let's
just
say
want to
I
make
want
sure I
to,
write it correctly.
let's say that I like the fact that maybe I want updated to be over here, right? That now creates a system user preference for me. So if I actually go and sort this by user preference, like this will actually show me like a bunch of changes, right? So if I start making all of these little preference changes to like favorites and other things like that, and in fact, it's also updating update sets for me in a weird time zone because of my time zone here. But you'll see that some of these, if I go to table highlighting, navigator, show ribbon, in fact, even just changing my own application scope, that is even going to show up as a uh, let's see, updated. Ooh, something's going on with my personal instance. I might have borked something earlier with a funky, goofy change here, but this should show. All right, let's do one quick little change. Let's do created. He says smirkingly, ah, okay. something's wonky here. So anyway, so let's do, actually, let's do for all here. Oh, dude. Guys, I'm Ben Forrest. I'm the VP of everything in my instance. I'm not the system administrator. So this is also one of those things we can all learn. Make sure you know who you are impersonating at any given time when we're searching through these. So yeah, so as you can see, all of these current app scope, system UI policy, all of these things that we just changed, like this DB order, right, on syscreated on, any of these I can do one of two things. I can make them for another user. So if I wanted to make them also for the system administrator, I can do an insert and stay here. I can also do this number and make it a system-wide preference for all users by leaving this blank and just applying a system value to it. Now everybody has my preferences. That doesn't mean that they can't change them back, but it does mean that they now have like my preferences as a default, unless they had a preference of their own set previously. So what's cool is you can actually go and do this. Like if I want to change my homepage or my dashboard view, or whether I prefer to have favorites or history or workspaces pinned, and I want to do that for other users. Like, so if I want everybody to have pinned or unpinned, and I want them all to have the incident daily dashboard set as their preference. Weird, right? Because everything's like a record in a table. I can make main menu pinned ID. Boom. Like I can make that everybody. Y'all have to deal with having a pinned all.
Right.
It's my instance now. Boom. You'll have to deal with my preference first. Here, I'll make everybody go to this dashboard first. Or if I want the sysadmin to go to that dashboard first. Boom. Now, if I go impersonate the sysadmin, that's going to be their dashboard. So those are the kinds of like little cool, like quirky things you can do, especially when people are getting weird notification problems. If a let's say a high touch or white glove customer is coming at you with like, I just got 700 emails and these notifications, I want them to stop. Here's how you stop them. Really quickly, you can remove them from the notification stream if they've accidentally I've had that happen. People subscribe to a change or a major incident and they didn't mean to, or and they don't know how to turn it off. Obviously, you want to send them a knowledge base article to learn how to do it the next time, but also you can just turn it off for them in a
Right.
pinch. So little
Those
things,
kind
little
of things that you
things.
can do for them are help, like
Because
that whole phenomenal,
oftentimes
awesome power.
I'm really like, I'm always super nervous about impersonating anybody, especially in a production environment. Don't want to do it. I'm not comfortable with your keys. So
Yep.
don't want to wear your keys, don't want to drive your car, don't want to sleep in your bed. Like
Right. Even if
maybe if it was a
even
fake
though,
set like in Ocean's 11, right? And we just did all of the stuff, we robbed the bank in a fake vault. Like maybe then I'm
yeah.
cool, like in test or dev. So
Yeah. I'm the same. Yeah, production, I'm like, "Nah, I'd rather not, please." Hey, while I'm thinking of it and while we have some of these pieces, we have gone through some, I think, pretty good architectural stuff in like a free flow form of talking everything from client end to server end. But we've had a few more deeper questions. And I'm
ooh,
thinking
let's get them.
maybe as we got 30 minutes, well, there's Jace's point about when, if ever, to use Glide Record, and then, well, client side Glide Record. And then some of the things that Philip Swan had brought up on, I have to go back and look. Sorry, Philip. That we had talked about as well. Well, and Philip had brought up some great points about please do not. I couldn't agree more. I was like, yay, someone else said it, not to use client side as a form of security. But but
Oh, good Lord. No.
yeah, right. I was like, you can actually look at it and change it on the fly in the web browser. So couldn't agree more. But let's grab this one thing. Well, first I want to see, unless there's something else, I do want to go back to Jace's point about client side glide record. And first, though, I'm going to back up and make one clarification because, again, people coming through this through ServiceNow Fundamentals may be going, glide who? At which point we go glide record. And I don't want people to feel intimidated by scripting. I had to learn scripting by banging my head against a table for months
Yep.
because back in those days, I didn't know it at all. And so I figured it by breaking it a lot. But glide record is a system, kind of like we just talked about reference tables, which are, a record that points to another table full of information. Glide record is the tool by which we can script to go from any one table into any other table or tables to search for, add, update, delete, get data. So when we think about glide record, we're talking about being on one place, maybe the incident, and under some circumstance, having conditions under which we would go to some other place, maybe the user table, the location table, the problem table, and search for, update, delete, add data in that other table. I'm in an incident, I want to change a problem. I'm in an incident, I might want to change a user's information. So that's glide record. And I just want to be clear on what it is we're talking about when Chase says, are there any conditions under which it might be, I might want to do this on the client side? So before we even get
Well,
to the server.
right. And I think it, like, for me, it really helped to put this into a context of, all right, we remember that we do stuff client side to help the users, right? To help the people that are interacting with things, either to clean up data or to make it easier for them to fill out a form or more convenient. Glide record, I like to think of is a, like, the browser based Alexa, or it's the browser based Siri, right? That, like,
Yeah, I love
we
that
have
idea.
folk, right? It's when I'm a developer and I'm working on trying to get things happening in the platform, I'm like, hey Siri, go look up. I'm sorry, I just messed up everybody's like smart speakers. Um, like, hey smart assistant,
Thing.
go look up these values. That's what glide record, like, that's the value of it. Like, go look up this stuff for me so I can make it easier for my user, right? If we think about our form or our app or our interface as the concierge, right? If you've ever seen like the Grand Budapest Hotel, you should be the best like the bellhop ever, right? Like, you want to be like service oriented. You want to do all the things. You want to anticipate the needs of your client. You use Glide Record to go look up everything you can about them ahead of time to make that process easier. I think that's how I kind of tend to
Uh,
look at it.
I like that. For a minute, I thought you were going to tell me glide record is the bellhop, and I thought, it kind of is. It runs the bags and does all the stuff and takes
No, no,
and
no. But like the app that you make, the scripts that you make, the forms or the things that you do, you're the bellhop developers. Like,
right.
you guys are the bellhop. Like, you're the servant leader. You then get to go command Glide Record as one of your minions, right?
Yep.
Like, that's how I like to kind of think of it.
That's a great way to run that. I think I can like stick with that in my brain and go, okay, I can picture this one from now on. And the idea to
Right?
be
Because
more productive. Like I want to think ahead of time before they get there. I want to anticipate.
right. So we use a lot of the client stuff. We force a lot of those client interact. Well, we say force client interactions, right? Because we're trying to go, one moment, I'm going to look up your values, right? That's, and you have to be really careful with that too, right? You can only say
Yeah.
one moment, please. One moment, please. One moment,
So
please,
many
while I
times.
look that up
Right.
for you, right? Before it really starts to tick off all of your clients, right? So I think sometimes people get a little bit, we get a little bit lazy with asking, like, basically putting all the queries towards Glide Record and going like, hey, smart assistant, go look up all of these things, right? Like, because you can, and just because you can doesn't mean that it's like a super good idea. And what ends up happening is, and this is a shout out to David Caldwell, like one of the people that mentored me in scripting, was, look, your client script might be like super lightweight and you don't put it on the server, but you put 500 of those client scripts in a stack, like a ream of paper, and then you slap somebody's hand with it on a table. That's really annoying, right? Like it's
Right.
it's like the physical analogy he would use in class. He'd be like, "Oh, if I just slap you with this piece of paper, is that a problem?" And you're like, "No, that's fine. Like, thank you. Just keep fanning me with that. Like, that's convenient, right? Let me take this ream of paper out of like the wherever we are at, like maybe a some random training site." And he goes like, "What if I
Right.
slap you with this?" Right? And that's what
Suddenly,
happens. Yeah, suddenly like things are worse.
yeah.
I actually feel like this is a thing. If I go back real quick, this is where you can kind of like when we talk about client scripts and whether or not you should glide record or not to glide record. What it comes down to is this number down here, right? So my values ain't great right now, browser side. So if we look at, so we got what I've got cached, what I'm happening in terms of server side values. Um, I guess it's not too bad on this particular page, but like, let me do a real quick example where this browser response time is going to be horrid. Let's go
Well, and
back
while
to the
you're pulling that
beginning,
up, I'll just mention what one of the things Ben's looking at is the performance across those three sides, the server, the client, and the network bandwidth in between. Now, ServiceNow breaks that down. If I remember correctly, red is server side, and the blue greeny thing is client, and whatever color is the
right?
middle is the network. So when Ben looks at that, you can kind of see the general overall performance of the system for almost anything you're doing.
And I'm like, I think it's hidden on this page because I don't have any data here to display, so it's not going to show. But like, let me go to, well, I just went to perhaps the most horrible table to go to, and we'll see what it looks like. But is it going to go? Did I actually? Oh, there it goes. Maybe I should hit enter first.
Huh?
There we go, down at the bottom. So for this, like, that's 2.5 seconds. Like, not super great, but like, and if you look at here, that's less than half a second. That's awesome. That's where we want to be. If we're looking at this, let's just take this as a learning moment. Like, if I'm just looking at the task table, maybe I need to like think about optimizing the most called upon table in the system. And I've got like a very unoptimized. I'm super loosey goosey with my um, demo server here.
I was
Two
just
and a half
about to say
seconds.
because you'll
That's an
demo or
eternity.
example, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've done some horrible things, but if I start doing some crazy things like with a bunch of like if I go to catalog and stuff like that, I can get I guarantee I've been in places where people have done some nasty things to this part, right? On the client side, where the
Yep.
client like where they've gotten their client way above like I've seen like 4 or 5 seconds, right?
Yeah.
That is an eternity for a user, right?
Well,
We were
and
getting fussy at this point, like at 2.5 seconds, right? That's an eternity.
as you mentioned that, it's funny. It's one of the things on the client side that as we were talking about doing UI policies, really what we're talking about is which of these things I have all of them. What makes sense to use server side? What makes sense to use client side? One of my markers on client side is when I see, and it's not a ServiceNow thing particularly. It is a universal web browser thing. Have you ever seen a form accordion? So you see 100 fields, and then you see 30 fields, and then you see 3 fields. But then that is proof, if you're ever looking at it, that what's going on usually is synchronous programming. So it's reading those things, and client side
Right.
programming. It builds the form and then it reads some kind of client side thing. In ServiceNow, of course, we know that I'll pause to let you guys watching think this through. We know that if I see a field accordion and all those things are appearing or disappearing as it loads, it's client side. Therefore, it can only be one of two things, usually a UI policy, usually a client script. And if I look to those and I see 100 fields and then 50 and then 30, that's because it's reading
Oh
the client
man.
scripts and going, oh, don't show this one. Oh, don't show this one. Oh, don't show this one. So that's
Right.
usually another great indicator of performance areas to maybe tune up a little bit.
Whew. So I'm looking at I could go for like another 4 hours on this topic
Right.
because this is one of those areas where we could just go and go and go and go. because this is like one of those things that's time in the seat. But honestly, the big takeaway that I want everybody to think about, especially when it comes to some of the performance tuning stuff or just like the client side, server side, this is not unique to ServiceNow. Um,
Right.
and I think that this is one of the like this is one of those soapboxes I love to get on, that it's up to all of us to make sure that these things stay in line, right? Like we all have a responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Um, and I think that that's kind of a big deal here because we can do whatever we want, right? We can do whatever we want. Um, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And you can, hmm, you can make any system you want do whatever you want. Oftentimes these days, they're so easy to do. I think sometimes, even if we don't think about the scripting element, it's just about the balance, right? What things do we think are reasonable? And oftentimes, I do like to decontextualize it from a tech standpoint. I like to make people do like a physical example. What would you put up with at the service counter, right? So if you list all the things that we're asking client side, yes, I know that it's so much faster for the computer to do it, but like take into account like network times and like where people are calling in from and what they're doing. Like just think about like and watch like the little timer. Like, am I asking too much of the client just because I can? Like, am I being
Mhm.
thoughtful about what I'm looking for and what I'm looking up? Do I need that data? Right. And on the same side, I think that this is absolutely true on the server side. Even though the server's got like so much more horsepower and it could do all this amazing stuff, do we need to do it for every interaction?
Yeah.
Like really think about it. Like really think about it. Like, and this is also why one thing that I sometimes like we have it nowhere in any of the documentation anymore, and I looked for it on Docs, and it's still on the wiki. Um, but you might remember Diane Cunningham's lasting tribute, which is, when is it okay to write a global business rule? And the answer
Yeah.
is, I punch you in the face. Like, just don't do it. Like, she will hit you with a stapler. Um, it is never okay, right? Like, even platform people, Chris Pope himself, like would be like, I don't know if I should, like, I'm going to be really thoughtful and careful about this. Like, Fred Letty might come in, but Guri might come in and be like, I'm not sure we should write a global business rule here. I'm not sure that's the right answer, right? They're going to be really like worried about it. And because there's so much of that thoughtfulness, because guess what? That goes, it's global is global, right? And I love it when I can make you crack, sir. Like I love just making you
I
just
just I'm
like
I
break.
remember because yeah, and the best way those lessons get stuck is if you were guilty of them. And
Oh
in
my
a
god,
system
you bring us
previous to ServiceNow, I
right.
used to demonstrate it and then not paying attention. I didn't think that my students would take the demonstration and apply it as wrote, and it brought a system to its knees because every single of the 1,700 tables, 1,800 baseline now that
Yep.
exist, we have to check your business rule, even though it applies to 5 tables, maybe.
Yep.
We still are checking your business rule every time any other under any. So it's just like, yeah, no, just because you
I
can
forgot to
doesn't mean
change
you
my
should.
banners, by the way. I was gonna say like we were actually in the Ask Us Anything side, but
Yeah. Well, and I
so
want
this
to
is one of
ask.
those things. I was going to
Well,
suggest if anybody in the chat wanted to at some point in a future episode, maybe not next episode, but like if you want to see how, because sometimes people don't believe it can happen. Here's what you do to wreck a system. It's so
huh,
hard to do. Can I just like, I have it. It took me an entire 2 day, like over the course of 2 days of teaching platform implementation, two different scripts to wreck even just like a demo instance. Like here's a PDI, like let me show you how to wreck it, just so you know how to wreck it. Um, it's so hard. It's like they make it so hard now, but like because you can't write a, you can't, you can and you can't. Like there's certain things that now like there's ways to optimize and things like that. But in a future
We should
episode, we might
do.
be able to deconstruct that.
I see a Halloween episode. Just like on the
I
trainer
do
side,
too.
we have the catalytic
Hmm.
collab where we talk training horror stories. I think we could talk, yeah, because pre-service now, I've wrecked a few systems by doing bad, horrible things to databases by accident.
Right. So I
Oh,
don't know if you guys
cool.
know, but my, oh, that's awesome, Alyssa. Think like that's cool. That's love that we're actually doing stuff in a timely manner.
Yeah. So
um,
don't tell anybody about
oh,
what
oh,
about
oh.
global business rules.
I've actually got a before business, actually, like maybe even a, ooh. So would we do it as a data policy? Like I'm going to ask you, Sean. So, my cat, some of you guys might know him, Jimothy Problematic Jenkins Forrest is, or actually Problematic Casanova Forrest. His actual hidden middle name when we go to the vet is semicolon drop table pets. Um,
Perfect.
right. So I don't know, like it's a weird, like little, uh, I'm just gonna leave that reference. Actually, like little Bobby tables. We call them little Jimothy tables. Um, I'm gonna go find little Bobby tables here and reference this. This is an XKCD thing.
And for those wondering, XKCD is a great cartoon to look up, but the drop tables reference will tell most database tables to dump all of their data.
And yeah, so like jokingly, I did accidentally do it to my vet's office, and I did. It was a joke. It was totally a joke, and I didn't think that any pet
Anyone?
database management system um, would have not sanitized their inputs. And I was like, oh no, oh, I felt really bad. Um, so
We'll
actually, I
have
will share.
we'll have fun on the
Let me,
horror stories time in October. Alyssa, do you have any um so you did UI policies, client scripts today, you're doing business rules tomorrow. Do you have any business rule prep kind of things you're wondering or worrying about?
great question, by the way. Yeah, and unfortunately, I did. I am embarrassed to say that I did have to pay some restitution in the form of public service and help them with the restore. Um,
Yeah, and I got to go back again for people watching this going, wait, what? Drop tables is a command. So if you put someone's name or in their middle name, there were systems at one time in which if it read the command, it dumped all of the data. So comic book or even Ben, not comic book, but literally putting that command in caused
yep.
the entire table to go away.
Which for fun, I would encourage everybody on the call or like watching to try it wherever you can in ServiceNow, because like we've.
I was not
But
here for
honestly,
that
you
comment.
won't be able to do it. No, but I'm serious. Like there's a bounty. You can go over on servicenow.com/trust as part of the security. Like there is a bounty for pen testers. If you want it,
Oh,
go
very
for it.
cool.
Yeah. So just putting
Well,
that out there, you're
man,
doing us all a favor.
we covered some great ground, I think, today, and
We had some
from
fun.
all sorts of directions. Are there any things that you folks on the stream that have questions or pieces, and probably then reminder for next week too, right? Or yeah, next Tuesday while we're waiting for questions. Next Tuesday is our all things, all times, all prep, everything to think CSA,
Yeah,
right?
this is the everything everywhere all at once episode for CSA. So
and
And
hopefully
maybe I should edit
everyone.
this.
So that's the
Yeah,
other
every
play. Bring your people. Tell your people's people. Tell your people's people that are taking the CSA. Come in next Tuesday night. We want the more questions, as you have seen in these episodes, the more interaction, the more good stuff we get. So the more questions and more pieces, the more interesting it'll be, and the more use we'll get out of that as you get ready to prep for that certification. Ooh, and could you write us back when you pass, or post with our names or
Oh God,
something
I
that
would
you pass?
love that. I would love that. I would love that so much if you're able to get it, like, so that we can get some sort of like shout out, like if you're able to get through the exam, like if you were riding along with us, like it's just nice to know that we're helping out. Um, Definitely want to get all of the questions from all of the perspectives, and then we can all do some flashcards. Like if we do a community based set of flashcards, that might be like a really cool thing to do, so that, because I think flashcards are fair, right? Like we're not giving you the test questions. We're telling you what you should know. And if you know your stuff, that's okay by my book. And Sean, I think you're probably right there with me, right?
Well, I have one caveat to that.
We
All flashcard questions must, should, if they're of any value at all, have the reference to where you found it. Otherwise, it is
citations,
useless.
citations, citations. Yeah,
Right.
citations. Yes, put your
Always
citations
never
in.
forget to quote your references. Yeah. Alyssa, I put your question up there because it's great, but it's actually one that I'd better speak, because by the time I write it, it'll be tomorrow. It takes too long to write. But I want to clarify this, because the UI policy versus client thing, and Jace was pointing this out in the text. The reason that people would lean to UI policy before client script is because it is a lower code option. Now, that said, you can script theoretically in both UI policy or client script, but we want to go to UI policy first because we want to see if we can do it without coding, because coding involves, upgrade impacts. It involves you and I put, you put spaces and I put tabs and lots of different pieces as soon as we get into coding. So if we can use a lower code option, we want to do that first. So
I,
please understand that it's not so much about one's better. Jace had brought up the question about winning, which one wins. And remember, both with UI policy and client script, they run different conditions. So they run in an order, and then the last one that runs is the one that wins.
oh, I well, I love this too, because this actually comes up with this has come up a few times. What wins? Business rule plus script include, workflow or flow designer, right? And the flow designer team has a little bit of an advantage because they've got all of the platform behind them. And so they are highly optimizing every single interaction everywhere they can. Those other things are just not nearly as optimized. So like when like a dev will come at me and say like, okay, well, let's do like a race, right? Like, sure, I'll put my flow designer, which has been like highly optimized and supercharged and tuned against your um, maybe stock, maybe slightly modified, and you've done like a little bit of tuning on your car. I'll put that up against like my highly tuned like GT road racer, right? Like it's like putting an M5 BMW up against like a stock BMW, with a couple of like CPU modifications. So I do think that like in some cases, like with the UI policy is a little bit faster in certain cases, because all of the field watchers, all those things we talked about with events, all of those processors are way more optimized because we know that people are going to hit them with all the low code options. Like that's part of the equation here, which is kind of neat when you think about it, honestly. Oh, snap. And Sean, you are muted, sir. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, I can't unmute you because you're muted yourself.
There we go. Sorry.
You did
No,
it.
I keep coming up with other I'm like, we need to do another one on that, because I think it's a great idea to do messages after, to put all of those pieces, even in Flow Designer, to just do a
Yeah.
sample scripted message in every single one of them that you can, and watch which one runs when, and then that's
Yep.
how you see who wins. So that would be, we could do a
Drag
whole
race, drag race.
episode on that,
Or
right?
oh man, it's like we just decided to do oh, you know what I'm thinking of right now as we finish up. Um
Yeah.
oh, I think you know the song I'm thinking of. You know the song, like I'm trying to get it there. All right, here we go.
I challenge you to a dance off. Hands off, no trash talk, no backwalk.
Right,
On
we're
the
gonna script
blacktop,
off.
just me, you,
I
that's
think
all.
I think I see
This is
I see a
Halloween. This is the Halloween
fantastic,
episode that we're gonna have to
Right
do.
now, dance
right?
off.
First part horror stories, second part script off. I'll take the loss on that one.
All right, just doing it. We're doing it. All right, it's gonna be
That's
fun.
awesome.
Friends, like this has been a blast. I could seriously go all night. This is awesome. Thanks for joining us for what has been the penultimate episode of the summer. Um, I love that word. I'm just going to say it as many times as I can because it means second to last, um, which I have been in my lifetime from various places. But this means that it's the second to last episode of the summer season as we've been doing this series. Next week is our final for the CSA, the ServiceNow Fundamentals like freebie program. I'm going to go back to my regular cadence, which was every 2 weeks, maybe. And I'm going to try and hold myself to it. It's going to be hard because I feel like, honestly, I leveled up a bit just like doing this week after week and forcing myself to do it. And Sean, you've been like a super trooper going along with
It's
me. Like you've been my
been a
accountability buddy.
blast.
And in fact, all of you guys in the chat have been really great, just keeping us going.
Yeah.
I might
We
try to
have
keep
regulars
going
and I
week
love
after
that.
week. Yeah, I
Yeah.
might try to keep going week after week because it's been a lot of fun for me to try to make sure that I've got some fresh content for people, stuff that's relevant, and also it makes me better at what I do outside of this thing, which is a thing that we volunteer for, right? We do this to ourselves. Um, honestly, like
Yeah.
this is just a thing that we do because it matters to both of us, like that the community gets a little bit better. So here I am out in Wisconsin at the moment and just kind of rolling with y'all like on a random week. So it's been pretty fun, guys. I'm really glad to be doing this week after week.
Has been a blast. And I'm looking forward to next week. And again, thank you to everybody who's been on. Please encourage people for next Tuesday and or to come back and check any of these out that are already recorded and posted and kept. So
All right, y'all. Um, it's time to say adieu, but we'll see you next week for the every what do we call it? I'm already have the show title for next week. It's
oh
the
really? Everywhere,
well
everything all at once?
it's the everybody, everywhere, everything, or everything, everybody, everywhere, all at once episode because I think that that's really important. So we'll see you guys all next time, and thanks for coming to Office Hours, y'all.
See ya.